Breaking news. The comic book industry is not dying.
Well,
That is a surprise and a shock to many of you if you listen to a lot of pundits on YouTube whose whole identity seems to be telling you how the comics industry is dying, how nothing can save it, it's in free fall, and we might as well pack it all up. But that is not true. That is not true. Because, in fact, the comic book industry is far from its death. Now, are there elements that are in trouble? Yeah, we could talk about that. But as an industry, as a medium, comics are safe.
this is breaking news to me. I've been under the. It seems like you're under the spell of some kind of agenda because I've heard that manga's on the rise, comics are only going down, and you can point to not the X Men, not Spider Man, but you can point to Absolute. People are think it's too edgy.
I was going to say, I've heard this, the industry's dying, and the only thing that will save it is picking up some guy on YouTube's comic that he's making that has a $30 single issue. Wouldn't
That is true.
that'll fix it, right? Okay. No, the here's the thing with comic books and honestly, the printed medium in general, it's evolving. It has to. What you consider successful in the 90s is not the same in 2025. And I think it's understanding that sometimes the goalposts need to change in an ever shifting landscape of a type of media to know what success is. And I think for what the comics are doing right now, it is successful. We're seeing it on multiple facets. We're seeing Ultimate and Absolute proving that reinventions of the characters can sell. Not only can they sell, they can be critically acclaimed at the same time. We're seeing that creator owned stuff is thriving. There's a lot of indie books out there, not even just at Image anymore. Yeah, sure, Image has Energon, which is like indie adjacent books. I don't necessarily call Transformers by Robert Kirkman indie, but that's successful. You got Ghost Machine by some really well known creators that is building its own section of comics there that's super successful. And then you got stuff like Boom and IDW putting out some like independent stuff that is interesting to people. Um, I think it's far from dying. I think it's probably in one of the better shapes I've seen it in since I've been doing comic book podcasting. To be honest,
Tyler, I have some stats for you here.
no thanks.
The best selling comic in June of 2025, uh, uh, you would think would be Amazing Spider-Man. You'd think it'd be Batman 160. Uh, you'd think it'd be New Avengers. Number 19 above all of them is Jeff the Land Shark. That's proof right there.
Sure.
It's downward trajectory.
Oh,
Those
you're
huge
you're trying to
titles.
prove it wrong by not saying what the actual ones that are actually selling are. What's number
All
one? Was
right.
it an absolute book?
Let me take things over because I want to present you guys with some numbers and some facts. So ICV2 is a website that takes a look at the sales figures for comics, but also different forms of entertainment. What we're here to talk about are comic books, and they published an article this year that suggests comic sales were up in 2024. Periodicals, so weekly floppies, hit a 15-year high. All right. ICV2's president Milton Grepp said, quote, the reversal from last year's decline is a reassuring sign that the medium can still grow from its current levels, building on the customers that flowed into the business during the pandemic. For comic stores, despite all the changes in the past 2 decades, as go Marvel and DC, the big two publishers, so goes the business. And we saw better comics from both in 2024 following a multi year slump in creativity. Now, Milton Grepp has said before, and I have quoted him on our main show, that the reason comic sales were down is because the quality of what was happening in the books was also down. He is a believer that quality is what matters to people and what gets them through the doors to buy comic books. And 2024 is a banner year for, at the very least, DC Comics and Image. You could leave Marvel out. Marvel put out some bangers too. The Ultimate Universe is bringing people to the yard. So this is the clearest evidence that we could have that the comic book industry relies on good books coming out, and when they do, people will show up.
That absolute line, I talked about it a couple times on the show, but it was one of the few books I saw Barstool Sports talking about. Barstool Sports was talking about Absolute Batman #1 when it came out on their Twitter feed, which is not something that I would ever think I would see, but they were talking about Absolute Batman #1 because it was good, and it was able to break norms of what Batman could be, and it generated buzz because it was good. If something is good, it's going to have buzz. It's going to make people interested. It's going to get people to go out and grab it. And actually, kudos to DC for actually marketing it too. I think DC at least put some effort into marketing within the last year. All In and Absolute had marketing around it. They had commercials. They had ring mats at AEW. And I think that helped DC have a banner year that continues in 2025 and has no inkling of even stopping.
Sean, was that by total units or was that dollar?
That is dollars.
Okay.
Now, granted, when you're talking about dollars, you do have to consider the fact that the average big two book that is in the ultimate or absolute or a big title is generally going to be $4.99. So you are talking about that. But facts remain, the comic book industry is a billion-dollar industry in 2025. Or, well, this is of 2024. It will be in 2025 as well. But you know what it was not in 2018, 2017, 16, and 15? It was not a billion-dollar industry.
Hmm.
It generated less than $1 billion in those years. So we're on the up from that perspective. And every time I make a statement like, what's good will sell, people get mad. But as far as I'm concerned, this is the clearest evidence of that being factual within the space of comics. Why are sales up? Because they're doing things that people like, that are good, that they're coming out to the stores for. The difference between DC of 10 years ago and DC of today is qualitative. It's quality.
Is there a percentage increase between years?
What do you mean?
Like it's like it's showing that 2024 is up, right? In terms
Like
of
how
money
much?
sales, percentage wise, how much?
Like the delta?
So sales were up. Uh, Periodic comic sales hit a 15-year high with 465 million generated in sales, up 12.2% over 2023. However, this was not necessarily because of greater unit sales. This is a quote from Heidi McDonald over at the Comics Beat. I would suggest reading David Harper's mid-year retailer report for insights into this. A sample quote: When asked about the year so far, retailers didn't focus on doom and/or gloom. Instead, they described it as record-setting and spectacular, amongst a great many other superlatives.
And I think the thing to call out there that even though we don't have units and to the point made of whether or not you have to have that as consideration, even if you saw a decrease in the amount of total unit, the investment in it, the perceived interest from the cohort that's already involved was greater, right? You had more purchases, or at the very least, there was more willingness to invest of the people that were already in. So if you're to bring more people into the fold, presumably you can expect the same and see a sharper increase.
Yeah, if you're saying a lot of books are going from 399 to 499 within that year, not all, but a good amount within that year frame. That's a roughly what that would have been like a 20 something percent increase in price. But it's just showing that comics. So yeah, it might not mean that the amount of book selling is growing, but at least the willingness of people to stay with increased sales grows, which only benefits shops.
Yep.
The
Yep.
the market for it maybe isn't increasing, but the people buying the books are still okay with spending enough money on it. So it's not dying in that sense.
Well, another factor here is that graphic novel sales were down 1.4% in the book channel, which means your Barnes and Nobles and all the places that aren't comic book shops, which is essentially flat, but it was up 13.3% in the comic store channel. So what that means is that people are going to comic book shops and they are purchasing graphic novels at 13% a higher rate in 2024 than 2023, which is another great sign that you could attribute some amount of that percentage increase, of course, to DC's what's their
The
initiative
compact,
called?
Compact,
yeah,
Compact Comics. Absolutely.
which was only the tail end of last year too. So,
right?
and honestly, like just a personal anecdote, I'm more likely to pick up a trade at a comic store. You know,
Same.
if I'm there, it's not. I'm not often finding myself in like a Barnes and Noble, and I got to imagine a lot of the world isn't. Um, so seeking out graphic novels, you had to have a know and a need for it to go on Amazon and be like, okay, I need this. I'm gonna go get it. Whereas a comic shop, I'm more likely to be like, oh, there's a thing that I haven't remembered that I wanted. I'll pick that up. So I think the visibility of graphic novels and comic shelves being more frequent in comic book shops is a benefit because I remember going to comic shops where their focus was on the floppies, just for visual real estate in shops. And a lot of the time now, I see a lot more of trades
Yeah,
in
it gets
shops.
people in the door. It is the thing that involves you uh, to then go down further into that funnel of the weekly grind, right? Like that is a commitment. You can come in monthly, you can come in every 6 months, and you'll have access to the same number of trades, presumably, or that is the cadence, right? So maybe there's even that long tail there. But yeah, I think the the other thing that is like at least anecdotal has been uh, my experience coming in because of quality. I've been picking up books for the first time in like 4 years. Again, anecdotal. It's not
Physically, you're
uh,
saying.
physically, yeah,
Yep.
physically, right? It is that shouldn't be a data point, but there is a level of excitement and desire to want to be involved in the ongoing conversations, and we already are, but more so even from the that physical space, being present, being in the shop, going to get back into that ritual. I think also just coming out of it's been a few years now, but coming out of COVID, that habit had been formed, and now it's relearning the habit of coming back out to the shop and supporting.
That point you just made. So, this is again going back to that ICV2 um, document. Sales were up 73% from 2019. That is some solid growth, even allowing for people leaving their houses again after the COVID boom. There are people who dropped out of physicals due to COVID. And the big two have both. We've heard it from the mouth of Scott Snyder. We've heard it from Josh Williamson. We've heard it from Jim Lee, but we've also heard it on the other side of the aisle from Dan Buckley, Marvel's president, that one of the goals of both publishers is to get people back in shops. That's why we have Red Band Comics. That's why they did that with Blood Hunt. That's why we have these really cool Justice League membership cards that they give out.
The
That's why they're doing these things. That's why Red Band is exclusive to shops. They want you going back in the stores. And what this is evidence of is that those initiatives are working.
I think of more recently Kirkman's and Otley on Battle Beast, the blind bag they did for the number one. That made me have FOMO, and I don't buy my books physically. The recent physical book I got was Absolute Martian Manhunter because there was a gimmick involved with that book
Oh yeah,
that almost needed to be read. It did need to be read physically, so that's what I picked up. But like blind bags, which DC I believe is doing with Batman, right?
Yep.
So there's data there that's showing that these kind of gimmicky things um, will drive people to the store. Although this is reminding me of the '90s with all the gimmick covers, so let's not get too crazy comic book industry. Um, but it's working right now.
I think the covers are probably the biggest sin, but these initiatives are wholehearted. In that, yes, they're an attempt, but they're not leaning on the need of the collecting aspect. It is part of. I think they're trying to focus on the community aspect of it. Maybe less so with the red band, but definitely with the Justice League cards. I want that shit. I want to be part of the community. I want to be involved in it, and it's a nice little reward, cherry on top for what I'm already supporting.
We're also at an interesting, unique time where they're doing these gimmicks, but they're also producing really high quality work, which wasn't necessarily the case at the same cadence in the 90s. In the 90s, obviously, every time I bring up the 90s, people complain, yeah, there were good comics and there were gems, but there was also a lot of bullshit. And right now, I don't really think we're seeing that in the same way. The books that are selling the best are, generally speaking, some of the best books that are available to you right now.
Yeah, it's not like the '90s where there was a huge deluge of with gimmick covers and a whole bunch of different Spider-Man comics. Oh, wait, hold on. But no, I think there is a definite quality thing here. I think there is um, an understanding, especially from DC, of putting people on books that work for them and books they have an idea for. You know, as opposed to Marvel, where I feel like it's a lot of the time it's like, hey, we have this IP character, we need to have a book out. Let's fish for people to do it. DC seems to be like there's no way DC was fishing for a question book or fishing for a Challengers of the Unknown book. You know, these books are just inherently making more sense in the world that they're building, and they're building a world. So I think that's getting people invested in it, getting people interested in it, and picking up more shit. Because I guarantee you, there's people who've never heard of Challengers of the Unknown that picked it up because it was creatively good and tied into the other world of the Justice League. That was something they knew about, that they can kind of tether themselves to. Um,
And they're catering to those people who are interested in being
yeah,
that expansive, who are interested and who have presumably the pockets for it, right?
th-
Like there is a cost thing involved in that, and if you want to explore more, it is going to cost you more. But if you've built enough interest, it makes the value of the book compared to the dollar that you're about to spend that much stronger, that much more
it,
enticing. And I think that is where the quality fits into it. The quality affects your tolerance for spending your dollar.
it's the MCU effect. Yeah, the MCU was successful because people were invested in the world. If you're building a world in comics, which DC is right now, the people are going to get invested into it and pick up the things that are secondary, are tertiary.
That's
And
not the MCU effect, that's the comics effect.
well, I know, but I'm saying in terms of the way people are more recently um, in tune to that. You know, that's something that you can bring in new people because they're used to that. You know, thing that took from the comics originally, um, and it's working in comics for DC.
When I look at this top 20, I'm not reading absolutely every single book that was in the top 20 for June. But it's minus like literally two or three of these. I'm reading almost every one of them, and I can speak to their quality. These are good books. Are there books that I think are also really good that aren't in this top 20? Yeah. But generally speaking, when it comes to the big two, the books that are the best are also right in this mix. Even Absolute Martian Manhunter, a book that I would not really think would have commercial value, is in this conversation. On this list, it's number 17, number 4, not number 1 with 50 variants, not number 2, number 4. That means that the conversation about that book and the quality of it is keeping it afloat when otherwise it would be straggling, maybe not even in the top 50.
There's quality, creator, and character that makes a good book, right? You need at least two of them, right? Is that the? Didn't someone say that? Um, and the character of Martian Manhunter is not going to sell a book. I'm sorry, uh, but the fact that it's Dennis Camp and Javier Rodriguez, and it's in an absolute world that had time to cook beforehand to get people accustomed to what this world can be, and had buzz around it, means that book is doing well. It's probably the best selling Martian Manhunter book has ever been. Actually, I think that's true, right? Didn't they announce that for one of the issues?
I don't know, but I don't think that's a hard line to cross.
It's not. No.
Gun to your head, name a Martian Manhunter run that
Yeah.
isn't Riley Rosmo.
Yeah. Which you can't even name
I'm out.
the writer for that, Marco.
Exactly.
Steve Orlando,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
after that. I got nothing.
He was just a king of miniseries that tied into events. I feel like previous to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he still is. But this is something that I hope you guys will take a lesson from, which is like, YouTubers are going to tell you oftentimes what is in their best interest to tell you. Um, Really, what's in our best interest is to just get on here and talk about what is actually factually going on. And when I look at these lists and I see these kinds of numbers, and I know that, as an industry, we're doing better than we were 10 years ago, that doesn't feel like death. That feels like growth. And you're not ever going to see the kinds of unit sales that we saw in the 90s, but those tremendously high unit sales led to an industry crash. So there is an argument about sustainability. There are tons of arguments to be made about greed. I made all those arguments in our direct market deep dive. I am here to tell you the comics industry is in a good spot. That doesn't mean there can't be changes. Everything that's going on with Diamond right now will be reflected in next year's sales. But for now, we're in a good spot, and that's a reason to cheer. One more for the good guys. Leave it in the comments if you have thoughts about the industry. If you want to argue, I guess, feel free. We'll talk to you guys later. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.